The senator from Pennsylvania.
I want to thank the senator from Oklahoma for his leadership and his work on this, and say a few words, and then I'm going to make a unanimous consent request in this regard. But first, just a little bit of context here. This federal government has doubled in size in the last 12 years. Total spending is up 100% in just a little over a decade. And what the sequester amounts to is 2.5% of this gigantic bloated government. But it's actually less than that in a very meaningful way, because the 2.5% we referred to, the sequestration, this cut, is a reduction in the permission to spend. We call it budget authority. What it is, it's permission for the government to spend money. It actually takes a while for the government to get around to spending the money that is authorized in any given year. So the actual reduction in spending, the real reduction in cash that will go out the door in this fiscal year, if the sequester goes into effect, is a little over 1%. A little over about 1.25%. That's what we're talking about. And our friends on the other side of the aisle say, well, this is impossible. You can't do it. It'll be devastating. They've predicted all kinds of calamity. If a government that has grown by 100% has to find 1% to trim over the next 6 months. Here's another point that we ought to keep in mind. If the cuts in the sequester hold, if we achieve the savings that was signed into law, that was voted on by both chambers and that the President of the United States agreed to by virtue of his signature, if we do, then total spending this year will still be greater than last year. And we're told that that's somehow a draconian austerity program. What we're talking about is a modest reduction in the rate at which this federal government grows. That's all we're talking about here. And we're told that's not possible. There's no way you can do it. That's simply not true. And one of the things that's maddening to me is the administration, and the President is responsible for this. They are willfully choosing to make the cuts in the most disruptive way they can, because they've got so much invested in this idea that we can't cut any spending. And because they predicted such dire consequences and such disaster, that they can't very well allow reasonable and manageable cuts to take place, which would be easily attained. And so we have this extremely irresponsible set of cuts that are completely unnecessary. Let me zero in a little bit on the FAA budget itself. If this sequester goes into effect, it's in effect now, if it holds, if it's fully implemented, the FAA budget will, as a result, be larger than what the President asked for in his budget submission. Now, does anybody think that when the President submitted his budget request, he was intending to shut down air traffic control operations? I can assure you he didn't tell us that at the time. The fact is, there's plenty of places where we can achieve this savings. And the administration knew this day was coming for over a year. There's been plenty of time to plan for this and to prioritize. The senator from Oklahoma points to the huge growth in the FAA's budget. That is wildly disproportionate to any growth in flights. There's plenty of opportunities to achieve the savings, as evidenced by the fact that the President never asked for all this money. Let me give you a few examples of places where the President, within the FAA budget, could be tightening belts so that we don't have to furlough air traffic controllers. For instance, the FAA spends $540 million a year on consultants. That's nice. Not sure all of that is as important as keeping planes flying in the air. The FAA operates a fleet of 46 aircraft. That costs $143 million a year. Very nice indeed. Probably not as important as making sure that planes are coming and going from LaGuardia and Kennedy and Newark and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and across the country. The FAA budget includes $1 billion more in grants for airport improvement things. Now, I'm a pilot. I fly in and out of lots of airports. And it's great when a nice little airport has a new taxiway. Terrific. But is it really as important as keeping our air traffic controllers there on the job? These are the kind of trade-offs that we ought to be making. And so my Republican colleagues and I, we've been offering a wide range of solutions to this. Senator Blunt had the idea that maybe we ought to treat federal workers in this context, the context of this sequestration, the same way we do in other emergencies, and designate essential workers. That makes some sense to me. That I think would make a lot of sense. Jerry Moran has another idea for how we could address this. Senator Inhofe and I introduced the bill before this sequester went into effect. And what we said was, let's give the president the maximum flexibility, right? The reason that they say they have to lay off or furlough air traffic controllers is because they just don't have any choice. The law requires it. Except they didn't want the change in the law which would have given them the choice. Senator Inhofe and I had a bill that would give the administration complete flexibility. Now, I say this because I pointed to a number of areas in the FAA's budget where I think they could find the savings, avoid furloughing air traffic controllers, but under the approach that Senator Inhofe and I suggested, they wouldn't be limited to finding the savings within the FAA budget. They could look anywhere in the government for the lowest priority spending, the most wasteful spending, the least necessary spending, or perhaps redundancy and duplication. I'll just give another few examples. The GAO has discovered that throughout the federal government, we have 47 different job training programs. Does anyone really think that we need 47 of these? And that by consolidating them, maybe we could save some overhead, some administration? Maybe some of them don't work so well? How about the fact that we have 94 different green building programs? 94 programs. 679 renewable energy programs. This is all over the government because we've never bothered to really scrub this and come up with the savings we could achieve. Well, we've seen the ideas. Senator Coburn from Oklahoma has offered all kinds of ideas. Senator Lee from Utah, all kinds of places where we can save. The fact is, especially in a government that has grown this big, we absolutely can find the little tiny savings that are required in this sequester so that we don't have to do it in a disruptive way. And that's why, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate Bill 799. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. Mr. President,